Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I had always dreamed of traveling the world with my family, exploring new places and experiencing different cultures. And finally, our opportunity came when we decided to embark on a long vacation to America. It was a fantastic journey that broadened our horizons, but little did I know that an unexpected battle awaited us upon our return. As we arrived home, something caught my eye. Our neighbor behind us had added an extension to his house. It was a pop-top addition, transforming his one-floor ranch-style home into a two-story structure. Although it seemed decent at first glance, I couldn't shake off a sense of unease. I couldn't help but notice that the extension appeared to encroach upon our property. Determined to uncover the truth, I ventured into our backyard. The fence stood tall, but there was something amiss. The soil beneath it looked freshly disturbed, and I could have sworn we had more flower bed area before. Gently peering over the fence, my heart sank as I saw undeniable marks on the ground where the fence had once stood. The sneaky neighbor had moved the fence onto my property, thinking he could build his extension without consequences. But he had crossed a line. My property line. Nervous yet resolute, I confronted the neighbor, hoping for a reasonable explanation. Instead, he brazenly denied any wrongdoing, claiming that the extension didn't cross the fence. Frustrated, I knew I had to take action. Engaging a land surveyor, I obtained concrete evidence that the fence had been moved onto my land, and part of his house now encroached upon it. Armed with this proof, I expected the neighbor to back down and rectify the situation. However, to my dismay, he stubbornly refused to acknowledge his transgression. He arrogantly told me I could sue him or do whatever I pleased, but he would not budge. Engulfed in a frustrating legal battle, it seemed like there was no end in sight. The neighbor's unwillingness to compromise turned us into adversaries, and our once amicable neighborhood turned into a battleground of resentment and hostility. In the midst of this feud, something truly bizarre occurred. One day I caught the neighbor trespassing in my backyard. He was chanting and drawing symbols on the ground with rocks, claiming to curse my land and bring misfortune upon me. Disbelief mixed with anger surged through me. How could someone who had already tried to steal my land now resort to such absurd measures? With the legal proceedings reaching a stalemate, my lawyer advised taking the matter to court. Armed with the court order, affirming that the house encroached upon my property, the neighbor was given a final ultimatum. He had 30 days to reach an agreement or modify his house to comply with the property lines. Predictably, he defied the court's order, seemingly placing his hope in some magical resolution. As the 30-day deadline loomed closer, I found myself filled with apprehension. I didn't know what to expect when the time ran out and the neighbor refused to act. However, my lawyer assured me that I held the rights to my property, granting me the authority to take matters into my own hands. Suddenly, a sense of empowerment surged within me. I realized I could legally destroy the portion of the house that trespassed onto my land. Although I couldn't endanger anyone's safety, I eagerly embraced the opportunity to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Ensuring the house was vacant, I armed myself with a chainsaw and meticulously marked the exact boundaries of my property. With each powerful swing, I severed the invading structure, liberating my land from its unlawful clutches. The sound of the chainsaw echoed through the neighborhood as I methodically dismantled the unauthorized extension. Piece by piece, the encroaching walls and roof crumbled under the force of my determination. It was a bittersweet moment, knowing that justice was being served, but also realizing the depth of the neighbor's stubbornness and audacity. As I worked, the neighbor returned home, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. He frantically dialed the police, accusing me of wanton destruction. The arrival of the officers brought a temporary pause to my actions, but I stood my ground confidently, armed with the court documents that affirmed my rights. The police, after reviewing the evidence and hearing my side of the story, had no choice but to acknowledge the legality of my actions. With a mixture of anger and helplessness, the neighbor watched as his ill-gotten extension crumbled before his eyes. There was a sense of poetic justice in witnessing the dismantling of his structure, mirroring the damage he had inflicted upon our neighborly relationship. Finally, after weeks of tension, the cacophony of power tools ceased, leaving behind a pile of debris and a stark reminder of the consequences of crossing boundaries. Once the dust settled, I diligently cleared the remnants of the destroyed extension. It was crucial to restore a sense of normalcy to our lives and heal the wounds inflicted by this arduous ordeal. Meanwhile, the neighbor wasted no opportunity to hurl threats and curses, fervently believing that his malevolent incantations would bring about my downfall. Yet time passed, and his ominous predictions remained unfulfilled. My job remained secure, my children thrived academically, and my house stood strong and unscathed. The neighbor's curses turned out to be nothing more than empty words, devoid of the power he had attributed to them. Over a year had passed since the climactic events unfolded, and life had returned to a semblance of tranquility. The neighbor, still residing beside us, begrudgingly rebuilt the section of his house according to the proper property lines. However, the bitterness and animosity that had tainted our relationship persisted. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Throughout the year, I had noisy and thoughtless neighbors. They would often have loud parties that went on until the early hours of the morning. They were all in university and of Indian descent. This becomes important later on. I had called the police, contacted the apartment manager, but nobody would do anything about it. I was losing sleep, and my work was being affected as well. I had spoken to them directly, but they completely disregarded me and refused to be considerate. This went on for months, and I was counting down the days until my lease ended so I could move somewhere else. One day I was sitting and watching TV on a nice spring day with my windows wide open. I overheard one of the neighbor's friends asking if he was coming out, and he replied that he needed to study for an important test he was taking the next day. This little snippet of information was all I needed. After his friend left and he closed the door, I proceeded to take my speakers and place them against the walls near where I knew his desk was. I often saw him studying on the balconies outside. I began to blare Merzbow and death metal straight at the wall. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and blasted the music as loud as possible for hours. Unexpectedly, my landlord entered the apartment because I didn't hear him knocking. He was obviously furious, but I simply responded, "You never did anything when I complained, so good luck. Call the cops." Since my lease was set to be up soon anyway, and I was leaving the state, I didn't care about the consequences. So the landlord left, and I was still pumped up with adrenaline. It was quiet for maybe 20 minutes, and then I intermittently started blasting music again. The neighbor came over, irate and screaming about his important test. He was a medical student, apparently. I just laughed in his face and said, "I don't hear anything." Then he made a fantastic mistake by telling me it was finals week, not just a final tomorrow. Perfect. I continued my disruptive behavior every night for the rest of the week. I set my alarm to go off every 30 minutes, banged on the walls with a hammer, and blasted music. I was going a bit crazy myself, but that didn't matter because I was wreaking havoc on this guy's life. By the third day of sleep deprivation for everyone, he came over screaming about how his family in India would disown him and all that nonsense. It only made me laugh, and I repeated the same response over and over, claiming that I didn't hear any music and that it must be coming from somewhere else. I started gaslighting him, acting really nice whenever he came over in a rage. That weekend, the landlord served me some bullcrap notice that I had to leave. I was fine with it because he had already broken my lease, and I wanted to move out anyway. I got my deposit back. On the last morning as I was moving out, I knocked on the neighbor's door at around 8 a.m. I asked him if he wanted an old air conditioner that I was going to throw out otherwise. He seemed completely out of it, and I don't know if he truly understood what was happening anymore. Anyway, I hope I messed up his life and his future a bit. He should have shut the duck up when I told him numerous times. The next one is a petty revenge story. A little background. My current place is a fairly new build that backs onto some woods and was empty for a bit before we moved in. My neighbor has a corner lot that also backs onto woods but is a bit oddly shaped since the woods are considered protected green space. Because of this situation, they had used maybe a third of my backyard when they did outdoor activities like volleyball and badminton. None of this bothered me because their kids are really nice and respectful. Fast forward a couple of years, and I'm having the backyard renovated. Well, the neighbor apparently had an issue with this because he kept bothering the crew during construction. He would tell them what they could and couldn't do, claim they were too loud or doing things wrong, and even say that I had asked him to oversee the crew. Spoiler, I did not. Eventually, the head contractor had enough and complained to me about the micromanagement. I went to talk to the neighbor, and he acted like he was doing me a huge favor by keeping them in line. But he agreed to back off, and he did, for about 2 days. Then I received an alert on my Ring camera on a day when the crew was off, and there was my neighbor on my patio picking up and inspecting some pavers that had already been laid. I told him to kindly get off my property, and he proceeded to flip me off and walk back to his place. Time for petty revenge. When we first moved in, I had a whole house natural gas generator installed because power outages are common when thunderstorms roll through. The thing about those generators is that they're loud when they turn on. Since we were doing the renovation, I planned on putting a living fence in across from the generator to reduce some of the sound that would travel to his place. Well, I talked to the head contractor, and we happily agreed to shift the trees from the generator down to the woods, essentially cutting off his property from mine. The neighbor was not happy about that move and called the city surveyor to dispute the property line. But my contractor had made sure that we were fully on my property with about 8 inches to spare to account for tree growth. The end result, the neighbor is pissed but powerless. I have some nice trees to look at in the backyard. And there's nothing to stop the symphony of my generator when it kicks on every week to do a status check. The next one is an entitled People Story. Little background. I'm a 22-year-old female and I'm currently 8 months pregnant with my first child. My boyfriend is 31 years old. I work as a secretary on the inpatient ward of a hospital during the second shift. I'm writing this on my cell phone, so please excuse any grammar and spelling mistakes. I started working here when I was 19, supporting myself through college, which also comes with great benefits. So my co-workers are like family to me. My biological family sucks, but that's another story. When I was 4 months pregnant, I shared the news with my co-workers, who were all happy for me, except for Patty, fake name. She didn't say anything. After a while, she started being friendly with me, asking about the baby, my health, and my plans for the future. I told her that my boyfriend and I were getting married and moving in together to start a family. For some reason, Patty didn't like this and started asking me about my opinions on adoption. I firmly said no, stating that I would never give up my child for adoption. For a few weeks, Patty gave me the silent treatment. Then one night after visiting hours, a couple showed up, a man and a woman in their 40s. I informed them that visiting hours were over and that they could see their family member the next day. The woman then said, "Oh, we're here to see you. We're so excited to meet you and want to thank you for choosing us to give your baby to." I was dumbfounded and shocked until the woman tried to touch my 6-month pregnant belly. I screamed so loud that all of the nurses came running. The couple tried to explain to the security, nurses, and me that their sister-in-law told them that I was a young unwed mother desperately trying to give up my baby for adoption and that I had chosen them. They claimed that their sister-in-law promised them my baby since they had been suffering from infertility for years. I told them that I had no intentions of giving up my baby and to never come near me again. I also mentioned that I didn't even know their sister-in-law, but they kept insisting that I did. The next night, Patty came charging up to my desk, screaming at me about how I could treat her brother and sister-in-law like garbage after she had helped me with my mistake. I immediately called security, and Patty, her brother, and sister-in-law were banned from coming near me or contacting me at work. However, now that I'm 8 months pregnant, I'm scared that these crazy entitled people will find me when I deliver and demand my baby. My boyfriend says it's just hormones and that they can't simply steal our baby, but I'm terrified. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, Shannon, 33F, have been married to my husband Tony, 34M, for 13 years. We have a daughter, Janelle, 12F. It has been a very rocky 13 years because of Tony, his brother Miles, 31M, and their family. Let me give you a little backstory. In 2020, Miles was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and the family has done nothing but enable him. He started arguing with Janelle while she was talking to his mother, her grandmother. I came out of the room because I heard it in the hallway, and he was literally facing down a 10-year-old girl, threatening to put his hands on her because she talked back to him. I stood between him and told him he's not going to put his hands on anyone. His mother tried to quiet him and get him out of the house while Tony was sitting outside on the porch listening to everything that was happening. I asked Tony why he didn't do anything, and he said his mother had it under control. I was seething and couldn't believe it. A month later, Miles came with his daughter Jessica, now 6 years old. I was in the shower and I heard him arguing with my daughter saying, "I'm going to put my hands on you, your father and mother can't do anything about it." I immediately came out of the shower, but he was gone, and Jessica was there. I told Janelle to put her clothes on because we're leaving the house. I called my husband and told him we're leaving, and Jessica is in the house. Miles returned and saw us waiting outside for an Uber. He started berating us at the top of his lungs, calling us all kinds of names. We quickly got into the Uber when it came, but he came up to the Uber and punched the window on the side I was sitting, telling us to go. I called the police when I arrived at my parents' place. They took my statement, gave me a report, and then left. I heard he was harassing people in the streets after we left, berating them in the same way. I told my husband that Miles needed to be taken to the hospital, or else he would end up in jail or worse. He told his parents, and they did nothing. Instead, they had him where they were working, watching him. When my husband went by, Miles slipped away from them and came to the house. After things escalated drastically, the police were called, and he was taken to jail. It is now 2022, and I have not seen any of them, Miles and his family, since that incident. My husband's birth family has been trying to get us to be around them when we'd rather swallow hot coals. On Mother's Day, he asked my husband if he could bring Jessica to see Janelle out of the blue. I almost choked because of the audacity and said no. I told my husband that no one has apologized or atoned for anything, including him. Jessica told me in 2020 that her father and others told her not to trust me, and that I don't love her. It hurt her because she said she told them that I do love her. I've had her since she was a baby on and off. How could I not? I also told him that in the future, his mother can bring her by when we're ready. A week later, when I went to a store 2 blocks away, Janelle's grandfather brought Jessica and Miles over. Her grandpa usually knocks on the door and she goes out to greet him, but this time Miles and Jessica were at the door. She had a panic attack while Miles apologized for his past behavior and tried to give her a hug. Janelle said she was sick and backed up, but Jessica came in and spoke with her for a few minutes. My daughter called me immediately afterward in a panic, telling me what happened. My heart dropped into my toes and rolled around. It took me less than 5 minutes to get back home. Once again, I called my husband and told him what happened, then had him put an extra bolt on the door. Today my husband called me and asked if Jessica could stay for a few hours. I said no, and told him to give me a bigger heads up. I told him she could come by next Saturday. About half an hour later, Janelle and I heard a knock on the door. I checked by the window and saw Jessica and her father. Now I'm confused because I definitely said next Saturday, plus I don't want Miles here for obvious reasons. They left after a while, and then my husband came home while I was once again in the shower. After I turned the water off, I heard a little voice in the kitchen. It was Jessica. I told her, "Hi, baby, you can come next Saturday. We're going to have a fun day," all while Tony was ushering her out the door. I asked Janelle how she got in here, and she said Tony brought her inside. While my husband was leaving, I told him to make sure the doors were locked because I don't want anyone coming in here. He said nobody was trying to come in here, and I mentioned his brother knocking at the door. Clearly he had no idea. Then he said his brother was leaving Jessica with him. But that was impossible because he was at work. He stared at me intensely, and I asked if there was a problem. He started shouting at me, saying I'm being stupid because I don't want Jessica to come over, that I'm holding on to the past. He made it seem as if I just didn't want her to come over, like I wanted to keep her away from Janelle. I told him to get out of my face and go. He continued to shout, and then bumped his chest into mine, still naked, fresh out of the shower. I told him to stop before I call my brother. He told me to call him, knowing he would do absolutely nothing if my brother were to show up, and continued harassing me. I told him if he touched me, I was going to call the police. He said, "Call them for what?" Then he proceeded to poke me passive-aggressively, trying to provoke me into retaliating. I continued to tell him to leave, saying he had to go back to work, and finally he left. My mother thinks I should drop it and let Jessica come over whenever, but I know they just want a free babysitter. Plus, I don't want to deal with these issues anymore. The next one is an entitled parent story. So I work as a secretary/receptionist at a small veterinary practice. By small, I mean that there are 2 vets, 3 nurses, and me, 6 employees in total. One of the vets founded the practice 30 years ago, and her son is one of the nurses. Because it's so small, we really are like a family and often get together at each other's houses for drinks and stuff. Due to this, we're also well acquainted with each other's families. The two youngest members of the group are my daughter Ellery, 7F, and one of the nurse's sons, 8EM. They go to the same school and often carpool if needed. This summer, my daughter had morning summer camp, but nothing in the afternoon. Since my boyfriend and I both work until 5, me, and 4, him, my boss said it was absolutely fine for Ellery to hang out around the office until my boyfriend could come to get her after he finished work. Most of the time, Ellery either plays games on her phone, watches kids' YouTube, or does some arts and crafts in the back office. From where I sit at the front desk, I can see her, and she can see me, but clients cannot see her. Occasionally, my boss will offer for Ellery to come help her with a very sweet and gentle pet. She would usually hold the pet or grab tools that the vet leaves on the counter for her. Always just normal checkups. Ellery was just exiting the exam room to give one cat back to her owner when this entitled mother walked in with her yapping dog pulling at a leash. She takes one look at Ellery handing someone a pet and immediately gets angry. "Where's the vet?" I tell her that my boss is prepping for her next appointment and that she can sit down and wait. "Where are your parents? You should not be in a medical area." She directs this question at Ellery. Ellery points to me, which directs her back in my direction. "Where are her parents?" she asks me. "I'm her mom." "You're a teenager." "Actually, I'm 21, not that it is any of your business." At this point, her dog is absolutely losing it. He's barking, pulling at his leash, lunging towards Ellery. She immediately becomes scared, even though this dog is like a beagle. She loves dogs, but also knows exactly when to stay out of a dog's reach. However, like I said, the office is small. This dog is between me at the desk and Ellery. She can either try to go around the dog to get to me, which clearly the dog will be able to reach her, or head back into the exam room, a route that also puts her in the dog's path. As I realize this, I stand up to go get her, and she chooses to attempt to come to me at the desk, putting her in the dog's path. Predictably, the dog comes at her and nips her before I can throw myself between them. Ellery's sobbing, the owner is screaming that Ellery touched her dog, and one of the nurses, the one who's a dad, comes out to figure out what the hell is going on. Without even asking, he immediately and firmly escorts the entitled mother outside to defuse the situation. I take Ellery to the back office. Thankfully, the dog didn't even pierce her skin. The emotional trauma, though? I don't know. 10 or so minutes later, he comes back in without the entitled mother. I ask him what he did, and he told me the entitled mother threatened to sue me for letting Ellery touch the dog or for child endangerment or whatever she could think of. He reminded her that any dog unable to sit quietly was required to be in a crate, and after some choice words, she left. He also tells me that he will be covering the end of my shift and that I should get Ellery out of there and do what's best to calm her down. We got ice cream and watched Encanto. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.